Hey friends, hope you're well. This is the new Samsung S25 Ultra, and I'm excited to put my iPhone away for a month and daily this phone instead. Yes, it is eerily similar to the S24 Ultra, but on paper, the S25 Ultra is an incredible phone and still the most widely sold Android flagship phone to this day. It has a slightly updated design and display, an impressive new Snapdragon 8 Elite chip, a new ultra-wide camera, and of course a lot of software changes centered around Galaxy AI. So I'll replace my iPhone 16 Pro and daily instead the S25 Ultra in the very busy month ahead. Then I'll share my thoughts in this honest review from the perspective of an iPhone user, covering the Samsung ecosystem and Galaxy AI to its cameras and battery life over the month. Right out of the box, my first impression is the soft rounded edges make this look more like an iPhone than ever. Not necessarily a bad thing, and hey, at least it's more comfortable to hold. Peeling off the display cover, the updated anti-glare coating seems to work incredibly well in the studio lighting here. It just absorbs the direct light, as you can see. It's way better in person than I had thought. If I bring in my iPhone 16 Pro for comparison, and excuse the sea of fingerprint smudges, it's pretty clear the anti-glare coating on the S25 Ultra is just leagues better than the iPhone 16 Pro. But I'm not sure if it's any better than the S24 Ultra. It seems to bounce light off identically, but the S25 does have this sort of blue tint in comparison. Can you see that here? I'm keen to see how this display holds up both indoors and outdoors over the month. All right, I'm gonna get this set up now, and then let's fast forward a few weeks, and then I'll give you my thoughts on the Samsung S25 Ultra replacing my iPhone. Okay, so I'm now a few weeks into using this phone, and my relationship with this phone is complicated. I'll explain, but first, we need to chat about the Samsung ecosystem and Android 15 paired with the new 8 Elite chip because, well, it's impressive and I've ate it up like a kid in a candy store. As someone who has been knee-deep in Apple iOS for over a decade, there are now elements of Android 15 on the S25 Ultra that I prefer over the iPhone, and that's scary to say, but here's what I mean. Over the month, I preferred things like Samsung's notification system and how organized and interactive it is, the convenience of the Edge panel for quick access to apps and content from any screen, the highly customizable layout of the home screen, and smaller but tasteful and thoughtful features like battery customization. I love that I could set up granular battery settings for specific apps. In daily use, the operating system is responsive and snappy once you get used to all the swipe gestures. The keyboard sounds and haptic feedback are very satisfying. It's just been really refreshing to use this highly polished operating system. Granted, some features aren't unique to the S25 Ultra, and I can almost see the inspiration Samsung has taken from iOS in certain areas. Like audio eraser is quite similar to iPhone's audio mix feature. They both do a decent job removing unwanted background noise from videos. But yeah, 1 month in, Android 15 and Samsung's One UI 7 spoils users for choice and value, and it's made sweeter with Samsung's promise of 7 generations of OS updates. Galaxy AI and Bixby were also at the center of my experience with this phone. Samsung's advertising makes it seem like Galaxy AI has absolutely transformed this phone, and I mean, it's kind of true to an extent. I'm not going to cover every single AI feature. There are just too many, and honestly, a lot of them aren't that useful, but here's what I found genuinely useful throughout the month. The first AI feature I think most of you will find interesting are multi-step chained actions. For example, a friend of mine asked to go out for dinner in the city and he wants to bring his dog. So I held down the side button and asked, send a list of dog-friendly Italian restaurants in the city to Daniel on WhatsApp. And it'll query Google Maps and WhatsApp right away. So what would usually take me a few minutes is done in a 5-second voice prompt. It's been super useful. But, and this is a big but, the output is hit and miss. So if I phrase the query differently, just slightly, and ask to send Daniel a list up front and just change the sort of the wording of the sentence, for whatever reason, it suddenly can't process it. So it's very useful when it works, but it still needs some serious work. The other genuinely useful AI features has to do with the AI computation on the cameras and photos, but I'll talk about that in just a minute. And all the other AI features I found useful, like circle to search and note summaries, is found on the Google Pixel 9 because of Samsung's partnership with Google to integrate generative AI. So Bixby controls all the local device stuff, and almost anything that can be done by touch can be controlled by voice. So for example, I can ask it to turn off the always on display instead of searching manually through the settings, but asking it to delete an app, for example, no dice. It won't be able to do it. But to be fair, if I were to ask Siri to turn off the always on display on an iPhone, it'll say that it can't do it. So Siri's about as useful as a paperweight, and that's absolutely a point to Bixby and Samsung. But let's remember, reading the Galaxy AI fine print here, all these AI features from the useless to the useful will only be provided free of charge until the end of 2025. Samsung hasn't even released any details on what pricing will look like, but by the time the S26 releases, we'll likely all have to pay for Galaxy AI, and I'm just not sure how many people will be willing to pay for these features. Moving on to the S25 Ultra's cameras, here's what I've found so far. I've been bringing around all three phones, the iPhone 16 Pro, the S24 and S25 Ultra, to take comparison photos. So I'll share a bunch of photos and videos I took over the month, from weekend trips to concerts. The S25 Ultra cameras are pretty much the same as the S24 Ultra, but still managed to crank out some great photos, especially in broad daylight. Just to keep it real, these photos are straight off the phone with no edits, so you can get the unfiltered view of what they look like fresh off the phone. Generally, I've found that the dynamic range is great, and the updated 50 megapixel ultra-wide camera produces slightly better photos, but here's the thing. The 50 megapixel sensor bins down to 12 megapixels, so if you peek at the comparison shot between the S24 and S25 Ultra here, you'll notice something interesting. The ultra-wide photos from the new camera are a tad softer and not as sharp as the S24 Ultra. Zoom in on the buildings and you'll spot that softer look on the building. But hey, what we do get in return is wider dynamic range and better color rendition, and it's probably not something you'll notice unless you really zoom into your photos. Shutter speed has also improved, likely thanks to the new Snapdragon 8 Elite chip, but capturing fast-moving objects is still a challenge on this phone in comparison to other flagship phones. Selecting the Pro manual mode and raising the shutter speed definitely helps with motion blur, but damn, does it introduce a ridiculous amount of noise into the photos. As you can see here, you don't even need to pixel peep to see the insane amount of grain and noise. Apple, on the other hand, does a great job buffering all the frames in advance, so the shutter lag is non-existent, and for the average person, they'll have a far easier time capturing fast-moving objects on an iPhone. And comparing photos to the iPhone 16 Pro, I genuinely think the iPhone gives the S25 Ultra a run for its money. I find the image processing algorithm better on the iPhone, although the telescope lens and significant zoom looks better on the S25 Ultra. If you're not a fan of how Samsung processes their photos and you have the time, you can shoot raw photos on this phone and then just add your own color grade onto it like this. Okay, as for video recording, it's excellent, and zoom functionality is stupid good. I'd say this phone remains the go-to concert phone of choice. I mean, just look how close and intimate I was able to get right into Keshi's face in this concert. The new Galaxy log video mode here is also a nice addition if you want to shoot in a flat profile and then color grade your footage, but it's still not as versatile and detailed as the iPhone's log mode. All in all, the cameras on the S25 Ultra are good, but not best in class. There are other phone cameras like the one that I've tested recently, the Vivo X200 Pro. Those cameras, they're mind-blowingly good, and they're steps above the S25. Now, the 6.9-inch display is 110% a selling point. It has been a joy to use, and I don't want to go back to the iPhone 16 Pro's display. And that's saying something because the iPhone's display is top tier as it is. The redesigned bezels and slightly increased screen size equals more viewing space. It's plenty bright, peaking at 2600 nits, and the almost 500 ppi density far exceeds the 460 ppi density on my iPhone 16 Pro. I've watched some Netflix on this phone here and there over the month, and I'm pretty blown away by how vibrant the visuals are, particularly at max brightness. And on that note, the improved speakers are decent and sound great for casual YouTube and Netflix viewing, UI chimes, but I found an odd crackle at high notes on max volume with dialogue booster enabled, so just something to be wary of. Then coming back to the new anti-reflective coating, you'll appreciate it most under direct sunlight. So small text is more legible on a bright day, and I don't need to squint so much at the screen. This level of anti-reflective coating is something I wish that all phones had, and something Samsung's flagship phones currently do best. I also began to appreciate the slight redesign more as the weeks went by because the rounded edges feel nicer in the palm, the back of the phone feels great to grip with its slightly textured surface, and the titanium silver blue color, I think it just looks super clean. I also saw the other standard titanium colors when I picked up this phone in store, and the jet black specifically is really nice in person too. And the one other thing I can't praise enough is the larger vapor chamber design. Specifically, it's 40% larger. This phone just does not overheat, even on really hot days or with wireless charging. If I had used, for example, the iPhone 16 on the same day, in the same situation, guaranteed it'd feel like a hot plate on my hand. And I'm sure most iPhone 16 owners watching this would probably agree. It's a legitimate problem. The S25, though, overheating isn't a problem. Beyond the screen and design, the S25 Ultra features an unchanged 5000 mAh battery, which all things considered is on the lower end of battery capacities in 2025. So at the start of the month, I naturally was worrying that the battery would struggle with the larger display and the larger power pool from the internals, but in real life, the Snapdragon 8 Elite chip and software improvements together do a great job hand in hand to really, squeeze that battery for all it's worth. After 2 to 3 weeks having the phone settle in and learn my usage patterns, I'm burning through roughly 70% of the battery by the end of the day with 20 to 30% charge left to spare. That's with everything turned on except the always on display, and basically 7 hours of screen time on apps like YouTube, Netflix, capturing photos, videos, and my usual daily usage habits. So you can likely expect about 10 to 12 hours of on-screen time depending on your own settings and how you use this phone. Now, this isn't a review without sharing the negatives, and there are a few. The S Pen here. Yes, Samsung has dropped the Bluetooth functionality from the S Pen, so, no more convenient remote functionality when taking photos, for example. Personally, I'm part of the 99% who didn't get much use out of it in the S24 Ultra, but that's besides the point because we're paying for a flagship phone. So trivial features like this should be included even if it doesn't make a whole lot of logical sense. We've paid top dollar for a reason, right? The next negative is there are no magnets in the Qi 2 charging system, which is pretty strange, but why does it matter? Because the magnets ensure that the charging coils and charging pad are perfectly aligned every time, like on the iPhone 16. It snaps into place. Correct alignment basically means faster charging and better power efficiency. It's strange that, budget smartphones can make Qi 2 work with magnets. I don't get why Samsung's flagship phone doesn't have it. And although I did get use out of Galaxy AI, many of the features still feel half-baked, which doesn't feel right when, we're all on what is essentially an extended Galaxy AI trial until it sits behind a paywall in 2026. But here's my biggest gripe with the S25 Ultra, and to be fair, the iPhone 16 Pro too, and that's the the fact that there's a lack of innovation in these flagship phones. I know we can't expect leaps and bounds for each yearly release, but when you look at other brands like Xiaomi, Vivo, and Oppo, they've been implementing incredible new hardware and features into their phones, and I'm not even referring to the AI stuff. I was so impressed with the Vivo X200 Pro that I'm reviewing right now, for example, and that phone features a silicon carbon battery for a true 2-day battery life. And the set of cameras on that phone is truly top tier. Make sure to sub to be the first to see that review, by the way. But my point here is Samsung and Apple are getting a little bit complacent because of the lack of direct competition here in the Western markets, while the smartphone market in Asia is totally heating up. But after a month, here are my final thoughts. I loved my time with the S25 Ultra and I adapted to Samsung's One UI 7 quickly, and in fact even preferred elements of it over iPhone's iOS. So what am I going to do? Will I switch? Well, here's the thing. If I wasn't reviewing phones and switching ecosystems and SIM cards every other week, I'd actually be pretty happy to continue using the S25 Ultra. It's a solid flagship and more phone than most people need. And if I'm being completely honest with you, I think I still prefer iOS for the overall continuity between all Apple devices I've set up over so many years. But here's my 2 cents. If you're upgrading from, say, the S22 or iPhone 13, this phone will be a genuine upgrade to you, so ignore all the negatives, they won't matter all that much to you. If you want to save cash and don't care that much for the small hardware differences, go with a pre-owned S24 Ultra here. It's still a really great phone. But if you're extra adventurous and you want to break out of the Apple and Samsung gates, now is the time to try your hand with our Xiaomi, Oppo, OnePlus, or Vivo phone. These are the phones that will give you the latest tech and a breath of fresh air.